I did a video recently talking about second generation dragon slaying magic. I'm going to do some more videos on the other generations just to help give more clarification as to what differs each type specifically, not just in the most forward way that the manga gives you, and more so breaking it down of what is the difference and how each of them functionally are obtained or acquired or utilized. But in the process of it, I mentioned that there are characters that don't directly follow what you would assume in each of the types. First generation dragon slaying magic is obviously the initial original one, and unless we get like generation 0, it actually was the one that came out before original, before Irene did it, and it's like a prototype. Maybe we'll get something like that at some point in the future. I know Mishima would love to just be like, all right, we're going up, but guess what, 0 is still available. But as it were, we know Elysaria is one of the ones that learned it at some point from, self-taught, and because of that, it puts him in a weird area of exactly how does, where does that put him. I still personally would put that as a first generation dragon slayer, because fundamentally the like baseline thing for dragon slaying magic for first gen is that you are learning it similar to how you would learn any other magic. And, obviously we know that there are ways that characters can obtain a magic, say like Gray getting Devil Slayer magic, Mira Jane having her take over pretty much just built into her, and it just going off as she got older. But for the most part, characters learn their magics as they grow and, start working towards becoming a wizard, find a magic that they want to go towards, and then so on and so forth. But because of that, like I said, Elysaria has the one that more so definitively puts it as a an odd spot for him, because he's the one that just comes out and says it. Whereas with Acnologia, there's so many question marks that we had around him for so long, and there's still stuff about him that we don't know. Like, one, we don't even know his real name. In his flashback that we were given, which was also through the anime and not through the manga, Mishima said, okay, we'll do it here, but also I'm not going to even give you his name. He's just the doctor at this point. And because of the way that he learned it, that we learn about from his flashback, if you haven't seen it, is he seemingly is also self-taught, similar to how Elysaria was. And because of that, that puts people in the same question mark of what exactly does that put Acnologia really, when you think about it. And I've seen people bring up, was he a 5th generation? Did he ever, logically, would he do anything with 3rd generation? I personally don't think so. And the reasons aren't just because, Acnologia was in that first span of Dragon Slayers that came into the verse. And as far as we know, out of him and Irene, they're the only ones surviving of that era. Again, randomly, it'll be like 5 years from now, Mishima's like, there was one other that survived. But Acnologia, when you think about him, and you think about him in the, like his existence in the series, you have to keep in mind not just what got him to this point. How did he live? How did he go about, his day-to-day activities? One thing with Acnologia, that if you say you looked at like the other generations of dragon slaying, we know that with 5th gen, there is a way to overcome motion sickness, and it just gets past that whole part of your brain that gets overwhelmed by unnatural movements. We've actually seen a very strong, consistent display that motion from riding on an animal doesn't affect the motion sickness. It seems more so of artificial things like vehicles, or in the case of Byron's, just big octopus, just swinging Natsu around. That's like the only time I think of, but it's more so, directly induced rather than like riding on the guy and that's going somewhere. Obviously, that was an anime original arc, so there's a little bit of leeway in there, but still, it's pretty consistent that because of that, only a natural movement does this to him. Now, with Acnologia, you wouldn't really have many scenarios where he's going to run into a point where he's going to have motion sickness as an issue, but there always is that possibility. But I don't think Acnologia logically would have went the way of like 5th generation. Obviously, there's some racial tensions in there why he wouldn't want to. But also, I don't think he would have ever come to the knowledge of that. Because I think one of the things about Acnologia that ultimately was a crux to him is the fact that once he got to where he was at, he shut himself out. I'm trying to get this camera to focus a little bit. He shut himself out from the rest of humanity and kind of just did his own thing. Like we know that he eventually grew to dislike humans the same way he grew to dislike dragons, because he's like, well, you guys are facilitating them. You're giving in to what they want, and you're just continuing the problem. Like it just became a cycle of, though dragons are the problem, humans are contributing to the problem and only keeping it going. So we know that after this point, he pretty much just cut himself off from everything. I just realized my dog's been sitting back there, and I was trying to get him to sit in that chair, but it didn't work. But come here. But he himself, again, it makes sense as to why he wouldn't get any of this newer generation knowledge, because he doesn't keep up with any of that. And on top of that, he wouldn't even have anything, say, like just seeing it on a Lockerma vision, figuring out from passersby. Because we know Zareth at a degree would go through crowds, and he was able to, in smaller amounts, kind of just linger and drift between humans and what they were doing. Whereas with Acnologia, he wasn't doing that at all. He was keeping to himself. So because of that, I don't think there's the idea and logically that he would ever learn about a way to get rid of motion sickness, as this is a crippling weakness to his magic. But also, I don't think he would want to, unless there was a direct reason of, like, I should do this. And obviously, like, not wanting a weakness would be one of them, but he would have to know about it, and he would have to be given enough of the position for it. And I don't think actually you would want to eat a dragon, because part of that is, we know, like, the dude is actually super racist towards dragons. He hates the other dragons. I mean, I say other dragons, so he's not a natural born dragon, but he hates them. So I don't think it would, if he was like one of those ones where it's like after a while he started to consume them to gain their power, and it was more of like he was looking at them like eating cattle, kind of like how humans look, or dragons looked at eating humans. But we saw a good amount of instances where he was going about killing dragons, and he wasn't eating them or consuming any of their body. So we can't say that he was a fifth generation. Obviously, we see that he is still affected by motion sickness, but I'm more so playing in the fact that we know that he has these traits around him, so it makes sense that he wouldn't be pursuing them. He wouldn't, even if found out, probably wouldn't even pursue the idea of turning himself closer to a dragon, because even in the state that he was in, he technically is not a full dragon, because he is a, dragon slayer that becomes a dragon. And at least from what we understand, and at least what we've been shown, I would assume that fifth generation is like a fifth generation fully turned dragon would probably be somewhere in between, I like a new version of a dragon within the verse, because you have like pure-blooded born dragons, you have dragon slayers that become dragons, but we know that 5th gen is a little different because they eat the dragon's flesh directly and they integrated that in their body. So I would assume that there's a slightly different end result once they get to it, because it would make sense that if a dragon slayer from 5th generation becomes a dragon, they're not going to have motion sickness or this problem where Acnologia still did. So when we kind of circle back around there, I think when you look at his character and you look at, again, where he was at, because, again, it's not like Zareth. He wasn't being like, you know what, I feel like I'm going to go try and blend in with people today. No, he was in caves, and he'd wander around in the desert, and he's just looking for blood and looking for more dragons to kill. So for him, it just doesn't really align up with it. So he has to be a first gen, really full and through. Like, you could maybe, if we got some crazy explanation, he's actually a third generation. But I still think that would be a little bit too far from what he wanted, because I don't think he would want to have any dragon, pretty much anything, put into his body. He's becoming a dragon, but it's through magic that's turning him into a dragon version of himself. And I would imagine that's, in his mind, probably more clean than eating the flesh and meat, or taking in crystallized body parts of a species that you outright hate and want to eradicate. So, at least for me, tell me in the comments if you think anything otherwise. Do you think that he should be a different kind? You think, is he a Dragon Slayer Generation 0? Is there something in there that we should, it's going to be revealed later? I think something like that would be really cool. Is if there's like a, if it was, oh yeah, there is actually kind of like a zero generation, but it's more of just like what we call the prototype, and the prototype is oh, it's kind of like how you have first gen, but because there's no like medium of teaching, it's easier to kind of go crazy. It's some form of like connection between 1 and 5, and you just have it as like the problem that leads to like fifth generation losing control when they use Dragon Force, that is rooted into what needed to be perfected in order to get first generation. Because there's still something that you could go into, like, oh, experimenting at the time of Irene did this X, Y, or Z, and once we got to the point of actually being able to use it large scale, they fixed the problem. But maybe Acnologia didn't do that, and that's something that maybe we could see come up in the future. But who knows? Either way, at least for right now, I would say he's definitely still first gen. I know I went into just kind of like chit-chatting around the topics, and I figured it would be just like, yeah, he's first gen, problem solved. No, I think it makes sense to go into why he can't really be these other ones, and why he wouldn't really fit in the same way character-wise, as well as what he was up to in the story that got him to where he was at. And it doesn't make that much sense for him to have gone about, if he was actually a fifth gen eating dragons, I figure we would have known that, and any indication in his flashback. But anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts about this and what you think exactly is going on with Acnologia. Like, do you think he's like a first gen, or do you think that him and Elasaria need their own specific gen? Anyway, talk to you guys later.